Hey, Scott from Ron Francis Wiring. So we're continuing to wire our 71 F250 pickup truck. The last segment we talked about, and I showed you how to install the first 3 bags, which was the alternator, distributor, and ignition switch wire circuits. Now we're going to get into what we call the D, E, and F bags. D is for the dash, which includes the gauge cluster, the indicators, radio wiper, things of that nature. And then we get into E, which is all the turn signals, and F, which is all the headlight and running light circuits. So we're going to start off with the D bag, which we're going to start installing now. All right, so we're getting ready to wire up our gauge cluster. And just like to point out that we do offer the very specific connectors that go into these early F250 and F100 pickup trucks. So it's basically, the gauge cluster is a bit of a PC board, ribbon tape affair with one connector plugging right into the one end of it. So we do offer all of these as well. Might be a little tough to show all the intricacies trying to wire it up when we're running the circuits inside the cab, but follow along. All right, so we're progressing on our the D bag wiring. You can see I've dressed down a lot of the wires. Basically, I've done some work that you haven't seen, but basically running the wires how I want, and have all of the dash related items coming out this piece of harness here. So it's like sending units. You got temperature sender, oil pressure, gas gauge, left and right indicators, high beam, gauge power and ground. And now I am going to strip these wires and terminate them with these terminals that will end up plugging into this connector, which goes into the PC board style dash for this F250. And I've already done color coding, so I know which wires here are going to go to what positions of the connector. And we just got to finish up those terminations. All right, so we're making good progress. Next, we need to work on the E bag, which is basically the steering column and all the turn signal circuits, including the brake lights. So in this particular truck, we do not have the mating connector to plug into the turn signal switch wiring that comes out of the column. But lo and behold, we do have an 8-gang connector. We give you both halves of it with terminals so that you can make your own connector system right there at the bottom of the column. So what we're going to do is cut the factory connector off the steering column, and we're going to terminate our terminals onto it and use 1/2 of the 8-gang connector, and then the other half of the 8-gang connector will be used in the E bag. So here we go. All right, so we're moving to the back of the truck. Now, I've saved you some monotony of showing you how I ran the wires down to the back of the truck, but basically what I did was I accumulated all the wires that we need, the right rear, left rear, parking lights, anything that really needed to come to the back of the truck here, and I zip loomed it and ran it right along where the factory wiring went, which was along the frame rail. And I came to the back of the truck and I split it and I brought them up to the 2 rear corners. So now we're going to make our connections here. I've already pre-wired or kind of reconstituted some of the taillight wiring, but I've also put a disconnect on there. So once we get all the wiring done, we can just plug it in and mount the taillight bucket in there rather than trying to make connections with the assembly hanging. So little planning things like that makes it a little easier for you to finish up the wiring and also service the taillights if you ever have to pull them back apart. So this once again is part of our the WeatherPack Delphi connector system. Pretty easy to work on these. And they are a good sealing system, so you don't have to worry about water intrusion. All right, and I also replaced the ground wire to the body in here. I reused the hole that the original ground wire was attached to. I made sure I had a nice clean contact surface and used pretty much the same style self-tapping screw with an eye ring, and have the ground coming out and be giving the lights a good ground. So we'll finish up the connector here and get the light buttoned up and move over to the other side. All right, we're almost there. So now we just got to do the F-bag, which handles the headlights and the running lights on the truck. So, basically the wiring is going to plug into the headlight switch that we provide. I was able to work this switch a little bit so that I can use the factory nut, because we're going to use all the factory bezels and knobs in the truck. So we already give you the wiring that has the connector for our headlight switch installed. You just have to run all the wires out to the four corners of the car. So here we go to install that bag. All right, so now we're going to complete the wiring for the F-bag. Now, I've spared you some monotony with me running the wires and covering them with zip luminol. So we have them to each corner of the truck, and now all we need to do is run the wires through the radiator support here and come out to the headlight and the front parking light, and we're going to make our connections there. Now, for the headlights, we do give you the proper sealed beam sockets and terminals. For the parking lights, we just give you long lengths of wire as a pigtail, and you have to make your own connections, mainly because there's so many different lighting systems out now. Many times the buckets aren't real good shape, so you might be changing them anyway. We are using the factory buckets that had a molded two-way connector. That's not your best sealing system. So what we're going to do is use a two-way WeatherPack connector, which we do offer as well. They'll be able to disconnect a lot easier, and they'll be a whole lot more weatherproof down the road. So here we go. All right, so we have all of our terminations made, and we're ready to plug in the connectors for this, basically the left front corner of the truck, both the headlight, parking, and turn signal light. So before I do, I just want to point out, we do give you complete color instructions for each group of wires that we supply, which is kind of cool. So down further in the page, we show you how to populate the sealed beam headlight connector. You got the high beam, the low beam, and the ground. So we're going to complete those circuits, as well as our running light and turn signal for the parking light. Okay, so now that we've completed the connections for this corner of the truck, we can do the other side and reinstall the front grille, headlights, and parking light lenses and all. All right, so I've tried not to show you guys too many of my bad habits, but having wired so many vehicles at this point, I do tend to complete wiring installs my own way, which is I kind of wait until the end to make all my connections at the panel. That's just my way of making sure that I can dress the wires down real nice, and doing one circuit at a time is a good technique if you're not real familiar with what you're doing. But once you get more familiar, you may teach yourself or learn some tricks that help you along the way to make it a little easier for the next time. So this is how I like to do it. Again, you got printing on the wires telling you where they go. They're all color coded right to the panel. Plus you have the directions to fall back on, and if all else fails, we have a good tech line. But so we've done all of the different aspects of wiring throughout the car, and now we're down to the panel. So I did already make a few connections, but we have the rest of them here. And I'm basically just starting from the bottom and working my way up, which helps me cut the wire to the right length and know that they're going to lay real nice. And you know, it's going to look real clean. Then we crimped on our fork terminal. And we're going to put this orange wire on number 6, which is an orange position. Tighten up the screw and we're done with that wire. And we move up to the next one, which is number 7. And we find the green wire marked number 7, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to keep going here and check back with me in a little bit.